Fantastic. Well, good morning, everybody. Good morning if you're here in the US. Good afternoon if you are in the UK, which we do have Vigil Shaw from the UK here with us this morning. I'm so excited for this Book Talk Tuesday. The topic is near and dear to my heart. I'm Danielle Ramirez. I run Quiet Storm Services, and today we have Vigil Shaw here to talk about their beautiful, beautiful book, Bibliotherapy, the healing power of reading. So, welcome, Vigil.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's so lovely to be here and talk to you and whoever's listening. It's wonderful to spread awareness of something that's really close to my heart, bibliotherapy, as you can see on that book. And yeah, I'm just really excited to be here and share more.
Awesome. Me too. So, I will share with our watchers, our viewers, a little bit about Vigil. Vigil is a bibliotherapist, counselor, and author of, like we mentioned, Bibliotherapy, The Healing Power of Reading. She's the founder of Book Therapy, which offers bibliotherapy sessions, literary curation, and bibliotherapy training. Vigil's book recommendations have been featured in The Guardian, BBC Culture, Marie Claire, Psychology's Magazine, Good Housekeeping, and other publications. Wow. So you are really spreading the word. So just tell us a little bit about bibliotherapy and yourself in this book and just how you got into all this.
Yeah, sure. So, bibliotherapy is this therapeutic use of literature. It's a tool for prompting more awareness, using the stories and narratives that we read to address some issues that are very close to our own hearts. So it's that resonance, that connection that you feel with a book when you're reading, is often offering us clues to things in our own lives. We're often connecting to our own emotions when we feel like we're really empathizing with a character. And those are the things that, I want clients to explore with me during a counseling session. And one of the things that makes bibliotherapy so unique and special is that we often feel safer exploring our own feelings and emotions through that of a character story that really resonates with us than we often do talking about ourselves, because that judgment, the fear of judgment is gone. There's a safety aspect. And obviously discuss this more in training, but these are essentially the reasons why, the book does its magic when we're using it as a tool. And often I work very much hand in hand with journaling and written exercises, so creative bibliotherapy techniques, as I call them. And my fundamental tool is journaling, but that's just the beginning. I have many other techniques that I use, from reflective practice to narrative therapy to poetry therapy, letter writing, a lot of sort of written exercises, as well as the reading aspect of it, that work hand in hand as we're processing our feelings. But the reading element is really important because it's really helping us connect with an emotion that we are perhaps neglecting, or if you've undergone trauma, it might be even the first time that we've even got an inkling that this is the emotion, whether it's anger or fear or sadness, that's really holding us back. And we're using the literature to almost excavate that and then
Mhm.
bring it to the therapy counseling session. But it's not something that necessarily has to be done in a counseling space. It could be done as a what I call self-bibliotherapy, just with some journaling and reading, using some of my exercises, which I mean, a lot of the guidelines are already in that book, but just setting out a framework for you to use to then explore those feelings. That's something you can definitely do if you don't have the time or the funds to go to therapy. So, one of the key messages that you'll hear me say over and over again throughout this conversation is leverage your reading. Like, there's so much that you can get out of your reading. So, there is value for reading for entertainment and passive reading, and definitely do that. But there's also a lot of value in using reading and literature in this way. So I distill all of that in the book. but I've also attempted to make the book a bit more anecdotal. So I would say it's, part memoir, part self-help, because I bring a lot of stories from the therapy room, and then I also bring my own story into how I fell into bibliotherapy, and you know, I'll talk about that today, but it was essentially something that happened during my own counseling sessions because
Mm.
I mean, my background is that I actually was working in investment banking for a really long time, but I was really interested in psychology and in psychotherapy. And so I did like a sabbatical and then did a part-time diploma in counseling skills
Okay.
um, and psychodynamic counseling. And it was during that time when you're training, you also have to be in therapy or counseling yourself because that's how you actually learn. And during those sessions, I was just taking in literature and, sharing it with my therapist. My therapist was very receptive to me using literature in this way as well. And, I went down a rabbit hole really of what is this? Is there something that is effective in this way? And I came across a whole history of therapeutic reading and the fact that, reading since has been used for forever since we started having language and written in this way. From the ancient Egyptians to the ancient Greeks, coming up all the way back up to, 15th century Montaigne,
Mm.
who used essays and a lot as a tool for self-reflection. So, I probably would, you know, give him the credit of being the person who gave birth to the personal essay. And then, of course, we have Wordsworth and Shakespeare. Shakespeare's use of tragedy and comedy is actually quite therapeutic. I'd sort of say a lot of that is actually a therapeutic sort of experience when you're reading because of the catharsis it can bring up for us. Um, and then also, novelists like George Eliot, who I often say is a proto-psychologist because she, even before psychology was created, she was exploring the ideas of how our childhood shapes our adult life. And I know Freud was a big fan of her reading, and I'm sure some of his ideas were inspired by her and also inspired by the Greek myths,
Mhm.
where we get a lot of the concepts of narcissism and a lot of our modern day psychology has been influenced a lot by literature and Greek mythology and which Freud has done a great job in kind of putting together, perhaps. So I explore all of that in the book. There's a whole section on a short history of bibliotherapy, and then of course we used it in the World Wars.
Mhm.
Library hospitals had libraries attached to them. Doctors were also poets. So there was a real connection that doctors had, even on a mental level, with their patients. And then, of course, post the World Wars, there's just been more academic research and studies that kind of sit at universities and in terms of the therapeutic power of reading. And you've got people like James Pennebaker who did that incredible study on journaling and how writing helps you relieve trauma. So yeah, there's been so much that's been done, and my job really is to distill a lot of those academic studies. I often talk about some of the research on my sort of very micro podcast that I have, which I call voice notes for me. But
Okay.
I distill sometimes on the research that's been done or things like that. But actually a lot of that research is in the book, and a lot of that research I also capture in many of my online courses on bibliotherapy.
Oh, fantastic. Yes. And I'm so glad I came across you on social media because you're doing the podcast, you're writing books, you're working with clients, you're doing all these things that I think the word we talked about earlier was like you're helping pioneer like bibliotherapy, not just where you're at, but across the world. And that is such important work. And just from listening to you talk about the history and your background is sparking so many different questions and ideas. So it's hard to really narrow in because this is such an important topic. Um, but one thing that you
Yeah.
said that really caught my interest is that when you're working with people, like, and they're reading, that there are clues, right? There's clues in
Yeah.
the reading that come up. So can you talk a little bit about what some of those clues are, like what that experience might be like for a reader and how they might be more alert to some of the clues while they're reading?
Yeah, sure. So sometimes we might feel angry at a character as we're reading and or irritated, and
Mhm.
we're trying to work out what that source of irritation is. And it could be that you are connecting with your anger inside at something that's happened to you, but you're just unable to talk about it or to even be aware that this is something that you need to take to your therapist or counselor, or that you need to just work on, maybe just write a few things down as journaling as you go along. So irritation and anger, just different emotions that come up whilst you're reading. It could be like things like sadness, you could be feeling a lot of grief, or at something that you might have lost, but it's not really, it's only until you read about it that you realize, oh my God, yeah, that is this is now giving me the language that I need to express how I'm feeling. Like this is also my story. And then sort of diving that into that a bit more whilst you're journaling. So and often sometimes you just it if you've been experienced PTSD, it's really hard for us to um even acknowledge that feeling and emotion because we're so
Mhm.
disassociated from it. So sometimes what reading does is we're not only looking at the character from our own eyes, we're actually looking back at ourselves through the eyes of the character.
Mm.
Because we're doing what we call reframing. And I call it theory of mind, really being able to self-empathize with ourselves or look at something from a different perspective. Because that then allows us to detach from our position and maybe look at ourselves from a different perspective. And that reframing is actually really helpful in helping us stay with the emotion, accept it no matter how uncomfortable it is, and then like address it. Because often if something's really painful, we just don't want to talk about the emotion and we'll sidestep it. But when we are really when we stop and take a look at ourselves from another person's perspective, we're more willing to tolerate that. And that is also really helpful.
Mhm.
So all of these processes are going on as we're reading, and yeah, and honor, and we're allowed to honor our emotions as well, because now somebody's just given us the permission to do it,
Mhm.
they're going
Mhm.
through it.
And then it's
So
like it seems too like it's adding that layer of connectedness because now that person's not alone. There's a connection, whether it's to a character or if it's a, like a nonfiction memoir, like you said, reframing it and looking through it in a different lens still allows that collection, that connection and that not feeling alone, which is so important in a day and age where isolation is happening all the time.
yeah, loneliness epidemic, and
Yeah.
100%. I think often we choose we choose our therapists because we feel connected to them, and it's the same for a book or literature and author.
Yes.
We read stuff because we feel connected to it. So actually, that is the first step when I'm identifying or selecting a book for somebody, is picking the book that I feel like someone's really going to connect with.
Mm.
That's super important, because if you're not going to connect with the book, I'm not going to suggest that for
Right.
you. And
Right.
then genre comes into that as well, because if you prefer certain genres, well, that helps with the connection as well. So when I'm suggesting reading lists, it's very tailored. Or when I'm
Mm.
suggesting a book, it's very tailored to the reader in mind.
Mm.
So what are they going to connect with? What do they like to read? What kind of writing style do they like to read? How much time do they have? You know,
Mm.
if they don't have a lot of time, I'll maybe suggest a short story or a
Mm.
poetry, an
Mm.
essay collection. If they like listening to a good narrator, and that allows them to feel more connected, then I'll suggest an audiobook, because there is something about being able to listen to someone's voice and
Yeah.
there's an emotional element to it sometimes that we don't always see in the, in the written versions.
Sure.
All of those things are like, I'm thinking about when I have the person in mind, and I'm putting something together for them.
Yeah, that's beautiful, that you're able to make it specialized for their experience and what their interests are and where they're at in their life. So you're truly meeting people where they are. And earlier you talked a little bit too about like the accessibility of this, that although obviously it's fantastic to be able to do this in a therapeutic setting, that there's other ways to do it too. And you talked a little bit about like journaling being kind of the foundation or one of the founding pieces to what you do. So can you talk a little bit also about the writing process and what that does? Because it I love I have ever since I was a child, there's pictures of me reading a book. That was my thing. That was how I coped. That was how I dealt. That was how I became inspired and did all the things. And is very like in a very intuitive process for me. But as far as writing goes, like that's a different medium than reading, right? Like it's just a little bit different. But can you talk about the therapeutic benefits of journaling or writing, whether that's for an audience or just for ourselves?
Yeah, sure. So I think when we're writing, we're actually expressing that emotion that's come up for us.
Mm,
We're actually honoring it, acknowledging it, processing it, even that pen to paper, or if you don't like to write, I also say record voice notes, audio journaling, I call it, because the key is to get that emotion out, to to understand what it is that's kind of really bothering you. And I think often it's the emotion, it's that emotion piece. Once you have that, then writing about it, talking about it, breaking it down, that it, what we call catharsis, really relieving that emotion, and then having a plan, or a step forward, because I often feel like we're such goal orientated beings that
mm,
without a goal or without the next steps, I think we don't feel like we finished the work, and we'll never finish the work. I mean,
right.
we
Yeah.
never will. But we always want to know what the next step is, and
Yeah.
I think that's really important, an important aspect of any sort of therapeutic work. But often, many counselors don't go there, or coaches do, because that's their work. But for me, it's really important to know, what the client will want at the end of this, because they're obviously coming here with a purpose, and it's really
Mhm.
important to me that we fulfill that purpose. And on the way though, that purpose might change, the goalpost might change, because something else might come up for you that you hadn't really thought of, or something else is triggered, and that's fine. That's totally fine. But I think it's important to have those aspects in mind. So with my reflective practice, it's very goal orientated, which is slightly different to journaling, which can be just stream of conscious thoughts, you know.
Mhm.
Um, so which is why I start with that, because I just want anything and everything. Like, when you're sitting like on that therapeutic couch, you're just whatever's coming to mind. And that's the same as journaling, but we're just writing it down. The
Mhm.
nice thing about journaling, as well as opposed to just freely chatting, is that, or freely talking, not chatting, freely talking about these issues, is that you can go back and you can see if you feel the same way after a while. You can then consolidate everything. You can look at patterns over
Yes.
time, and when we don't write things down or record them in a voice note, we miss all of that amazing work that,
Mhm. Yeah,
maybe
absolutely.
conclusions and intuitive things that we can now start drawing from it. So
Mhm.
that's why it's a really important, tool for me to work in that way.
Yeah, I love that. I've found in my own journaling practice that when I go back and read, I start to notice themes that I hadn't been aware of, and so usually that's a clue for me to explore that a little bit deeper. Well,
Yeah.
Bidjo, we are wrapping up our time here, and so I do have one last question for you. you created this beautiful book and you have this beautiful practice of the work that you do with people. What advice do you have for others out there who would like to become an author, or maybe they've already published several books? What would you say to them? What advice or encouragement, perhaps, is a better word? What would you say?
Yeah, well, one of the key things that I've learned is that it's not a linear process, right?
Mm.
Like you'll have the setbacks and you'll have something amazing come by. And so for me, it's really important, to just be persistent, never give up because you just don't know what's around the corner. I mean, I shelved my book proposal like 4 times because
Oh,
I just
wow.
nobody was interested in the idea or
Ah,
nobody was interested in this space.
oh my God.
Um, and then, just surprisingly, something really random turned up and one publisher was interested, and then all of a sudden everyone was interested. So they had multiple publishers interested in it. And I think that's the thing, like you just don't know what's around the corner if you just went that little bit further. So that's why I'm like, do not give up. Recognize that it's not a linear process. And it's a bit like running a business. Like you're gonna have the ups and downs. You're gonna need to have the self-motivation to keep going. And you're always going to be navigating uncertainty, um, and just lots of unknowns all the time.
Sure.
But just don't give up because the right eyeball, that one eyeball can change everything, and it's kind of
It,
waiting for that person to turn up.
yeah.
Um,
You're absolutely right that I'm so glad that you didn't stop and that you took that next step, right? To get your work into the world, because this is so impactful. And I really have no doubt that the work you're doing and the energy behind it is going to continue to impact people's lives for generations to come.
oh, thanks.
And so for people out there watching, so you have what's the name of your podcast?
It's Bibliotherapy with Bijal Shah.
Okay. Okay.
And it's very, like I said, it's voice notes from me because I often give little snippets, and just a bit of a broadcast, and also lots of book recommendations from a mental health perspective,
Yeah.
different issues. But you can also find those same similar reading lists in the book, an A to
Okay.
Z. That's very comprehensive because it's an A to Z of mental health themes from anxiety to midlife crisis to grief to loss, anger.
Classic.
It addresses all of that across fiction and nonfiction and poetry because I work with all three.
Mm-hmm.
I work with essays. So it's all of that. And then of course I've got all the courses. So there's a
Okay.
bibliotherapy course and then a children's one. Today I've just at the end of this month, we're just launching the group bibliotherapy one.
Okay.
Um, and I talk about how I love group bibliotherapy, and there's a story in the book about how I used it, and that was really helpful for readers. But yeah, so look, I do lots of things. I do book prescriptions as well. If you just want a list of books
Mm-hmm.
on specific issues that are again very tailored to your issue, I get you to do a little questionnaire, and yeah, so people also enjoy getting that really personalized reading list. But for me, it's really about spreading awareness of the existence of bibliotherapy and how we can use it for our
Mm-hmm.
own benefit, and for the benefit of others, other people in your lives who like reading books, and this could be a good tool for them.
Yeah.
So that's really my mission. It's really creating this awareness of bibliotherapy. So
I love that. I love that. We're definitely gonna have to keep connecting because I'm just so impressed and there's so much to learn and I cannot wait to dig in to this book and get to that reading list. I imagine, excuse me, that it would be hard to keep the list contained because I imagine if I was doing this, I would want to continue keep adding books to the list to
yes,
recommend to people because there's so many great
yeah,
books.
I feel
There's,
like I need a second edition. Yeah.
yeah, it's almost infinite. So, All right, Vigil, it's so great to have you. Thank you. Thank you. Take good care and thank you, everybody out there who's watching.
Oh no, thank you so much for having me.
Bye.
Bye.